Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Professor Kenneth Arrow, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist who has studied many areas of economic theory. Professor, I'd like to start talking today a little bit about some of your work in market failure. Market failure, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is basically the concept that sometimes the markets don't work as a way of distributing goods and services, and that would be a market failure, and that's when the government should step in. That research you did about 50 years ago, does it still apply today?
I think it applies more than ever, because it extends not only to the health questions, but, for example, to the financial system.
So let's touch on that. Could you, the healthcare, which I think is what you really focused on, is a very big issue today. Do you think that the research you did so long ago can be applied to solving today's problems?
Well, I don't want to say solving, because in many ways what I did was rather anatomize, explain why what the problems were, rather than necessarily giving solutions.
Okay.
There's explanations of why a free market system will not work in health. Although we can use aspects of markets in health. I don't mean to say that prices do not matter, but they are not by any means the whole story, and much must be done to rectify the situation.
So why would you say that healthcare stands out as an industry that gets affected by market failure?
Well, to put it in a nutshell, and I'll expand on it, there are two aspects. One is that after all, health costs are very uncertain from the individual point of view. Some people, the number of people the health cost may be for an individual may be very large. So first, I said, it's subject to uncertainty, and is therefore an object for insurance. In the aggregate, there's much less uncertainty. We have pretty good statistics, on how many people are likely to need open heart surgery or expensive cancer operations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but from the individual point of view, it's extremely uncertain. That is one aspect of the matter. Now, that's something we have in other fields of economic activity. Insure your automobile against damage and also against liability to others. You insure houses against fire or storms or water damage, which may not be such a big problem in Israel, but it's significant in the United States. But on top of the insurance question, it's a problem which arises in almost any kind of insurance, but arises much more strongly in health. That is, that the information available to the different parts of the system, different economic agents operating in the system, is quite different. So when I'm dealing with you, I know that you know things that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That problem does occur in almost all forms of insurance, just to a limited extent, but they're much more important in health than they are, say, in fire insurance.
I'm not sure I understand why. It would seem to me that someone is just has some percentage chance to get a certain illness as he has some percentage chance for his house to burn down, and by having a free market of insurance companies bidding to protect you, wouldn't that be a market success?
The question is, how do you know it's not knowing the risks beforehand, it's knowing whether or not the risk has occurred. Well, let me give you an example from fire insurance, for example. I may be having fire insurance, I may be rather careless about lighting fires or lighting candles in my house. I may feel that I bought the insurance, and therefore, if I do something dangerous, I'll be paid anyway. So there is a well-known property of insurance called moral hazard. I may take chances, but this is a minor matter when it comes to ordinary people don't burn down their houses. And indeed, the insurance industry already has protection against that. You can't insure your house for more than it's worth. You might say, why? Because obviously, if it insured more than it's worth, you'd have an incentive to burn your house down. So this problem exists, but it is much more acute in the health field than it is in others. The question is, for example, if I feel sick, I don't know. I'm a layman. I don't have the expert knowledge necessarily to know what I'm sick of or what the situation is. The doctor, because of his, has accumulated as a result of going to medical school and years of practice, much more knowledge than I have. The question is then, will he exert himself to the full limit if I have a case that's difficult to diagnose? Will he exert himself? How much effort does he put in to determining the effort? I can't really check on whether he's fully responsible.
Isn't that the problem you have with any professional, whether it's lawyers or accountants?
I believe it is a special. That's what makes those professions specially different from other occupations. Exactly. It's true in law. It's true that a profession is essentially somebody. The essence of a professional activity is that one party knows a good deal more than the other party. That's why you go to it. That's why the activity exists in the first place. Mm-hmm. If I knew as much medicine as the doctor does, I wouldn't go to him necessarily. I may go to him for his technical skills, but I wouldn't go to him for knowledge. And it's the knowledge that's by far the more important part of medicine. Knowing what to do is the essential difficulty. But in addition to this, there's a third player in the health field, and that's the insurer. Now, both the question of prescribing in a way that what are the costs of an illness? It's not a simple fact that if I'm sick and I need to spend so much money. That's something that's determined by the doctor and the patient.
But doesn't the law of large numbers give us some sense and give the insurers a sense of what they're going to have to pay for each person?
No, because the question whether you need, supposing there's an extremely expensive treatment which may give some value, may prolong your life by 2 days. The question is, if I had to pay it, I'd be very careful. I might worry about my heirs, for example. But the insurance company is slightly remote, and they have to. If you take the standard view of an insurance company, they pay the damages. Well, what are the damages? In the case of a house, that's pretty well, you can pretty well tell. In the case of a medical procedure, there are medical procedures which are more expensive and less expensive, more productive and less productive, and in the class of the insurance company is really a remote third party. The physician and the patient may have an incentive to say, well, let's go for the very best, even though the additional costs, the additional gain is quite small compared to the costs.
Well, according to what the insurance company would see. We are talking with Professor Kenneth Arrow, who is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. We've been talking about the work that he's done in market failure, especially as it applies to healthcare, which is, many people think, a market that is failing. Based on what you're saying, Professor, it would sound to me as though, given the complexities of the healthcare, rather than trying to find one central solution, would be to let each person decide for himself based on his personal and religious beliefs, rather than even necessarily going to an insurance company, let alone some sort of centralized decision-making panel.
Well, how can I get that? Well, you can't. After all, there are real uncertainties, and I cannot, if I'm a below-average income worker, I can't afford expensive treatments. See, the availability of expensive one of the problems, of course, has been the availability and usefulness of expensive treatments has vastly increased. From my point of view, that means that medical care is cheaper than it used to be. Things that you couldn't do at all and therefore were infinitely costly are now possible. But that does mean that you're going to have an increase in the demand for these medical services. In the United States, to take the American figures, which are high, the medical expenditures are something like $7,000 per person per year.
That's what the government pays, right? And then
no, that's total.
Oh, altogether. That's not including
everybody pays. Okay. The government pays a little over half of that.
Okay.
So a little less than 7,000, but let's say roughly right. No, that's right. That's right. It's at least 7,000. That means for a family of four, it's $28,000. So if everybody paid, well, it's obvious that this means there's a very considerable part of the population where the total income is less than $28,000.
Sure.
And for most people, at $28,000 is more than half your total income. Mm-hmm. You squeeze out food and clothing and shelter. Furthermore, the person who has it, the person who needs the things, is a small part of the population. They may need not $7,000, but $100,000. Mm-hmm. So you cannot leave it as individuals because they simply would be priced out of the system. And you want to take advantage of the fact, the law of large numbers, as you put it, to have insurance. The problem is insurance also has problems. One of the results has been that the insurance companies and then became more and more directly involved in medication. And they weren't just simply people who paid, you sent them a bill and they paid it. They would look into it. They'd second guess. And the form that's become dominant in the United States is a health, with something similar in Israel, but with a very different payment system, is the having organizations, what we call in the United States health maintenance organizations, mm-hmm. where doctors are involved as a group of doctors, as a collective group, forms and supplies with medical services, and so they have direct access to the knowledge and don't simply get bills.
But they represent the insurance companies and presumably trying to cut expenses.
Well, you see, the characteristic organization is something which both supplies insurance and supplies medical services. It isn't just an insurance company that pays money, mm-hmm. as it is in fire. For example, what's called the Kaiser Permanente system is perhaps the largest system in the United States. It is an organization which hires doctors. It may pay them on some fee-for-service basis, or may pay them a salary or something. There are different ways of compensating doctors. A fee-for-service, which has been typical, it has many incentives, obviously, to increase the amount of services. So any method of compensation you can think of will create incentives. There's no way out of that.
Sure.
It's just to pick the least bad system. Personally, I think the United States system is maybe one of the worst systems, actually.
The way it has been, or the way that it's...
I'm sorry?
When you say it's the worst system, do you mean the way it has been, or the way that it's moving right now?
Oh well, I think the Obamacare represents a mild improvement.
A mild improvement?
Because it doesn't get far. I think it was a step forward in the sense of covering more people. It's got holes. There are a lot of problems with it, but in particular, it doesn't address very well the problem of reining in costs. Mm-hmm. We have an extremely expensive system.
I see. We do have it does appear to be an extremely expensive system, and also on the extremes, unfortunately, is that we're just about out of time. Tell me something, Professor. You're continuing to work at Stanford. Is there a way that people can follow your work these days?
Well, I work. I must admit, I work for the economics profession, and hope that other people translate these things into policy.
All right. So
I'm a scholar, not a policymaker.
All right, so we will continue to look for your scholarship and your writings, and I want to thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much, Mr. Rosie. Bye.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.